Charlotte Howland snapped the mandrake root in two with her thumbnails and set both halves on the damp slate slab beside her before the postboy had even finished crossing the garden. Her hands were black to the knuckles with March earth. The cuffs of her sleeves had been rolled twice to keep the wet off. There was a rook somewhere over the yew hedge that had been scolding her for 20 minutes because she had disturbed its breakfast, and she had largely won the argument. "Miss Howland!" The postboy was out of breath. He was always out of breath. He ran everywhere, for reasons nobody in Tarnmore had ever been able to satisfactorily extract from him. "From Ashmore Park. Sealed." He held the letter out as though it might bite him. Charlotte wiped her hand on the apron she wore for garden work, which was a waste of effort, because the apron was now in approximately the same condition as her hand. She accepted the letter. The seal was black wax, stamped with a hunting horn and a sprig of ash, the crest of Ashmore, which had been in abeyance for 7 years and was, apparently, no longer. "Any reply required?" "He said to wait until you had read it, miss, and carry word if your uncle was not well enough to come." He. Charlotte permitted herself the smallest internal smile. The postboy had already, in 3 days, begun referring to the new Duke of Ashmore simply as he, the way servants do when a household has finally settled into having a master again, after years of being run by committees of solicitors. The village had survived the interregnum largely by pretending it wasn't happening. Now the actual Duke was in residence, and the village was, in its quiet way, reconfiguring itself around that fact, like iron filings discovering a magnet they had been denied. She broke the seal. The hand was clear, square, and plainly not a solicitor's. "Miss Howland, I would be obliged if your uncle might call at the house. A kitchen maid requires attention. The family physician is in London. Ashmore." She read it twice. Her uncle, Mr. Howland, was, at this particular moment, asleep in the front parlour, with his gouty left foot propped on 3 velvet cushions and a tumbler of peppermint water on the side table. He had been immobilized in that chair for 9 days. The physician Ashmore had mentioned, Dr. Prendergast, would no more treat a kitchen maid than he would treat a cart horse, because Dr. Prendergast lived for portraits of himself and would consider the errand beneath him. If the Duke knew this, and the tone of the letter suggested he did, then he had written to the apothecary first, knowingly, and the word obliged was doing a quiet piece of work. Charlotte folded the letter. "My uncle is confined to his chair with gout and will be for another fortnight, but a kitchen maid does not wait a fortnight." She looked up at the postboy. "Tell His Grace I shall ride up this afternoon." The rook overhead said something sarcastic. "Yes," Charlotte said to the rook. "I know." She rode up to Ashmore Park on her uncle's black pony at 2:30, with the apothecary bag balanced across her lap and the smell of crushed comfrey leaves coming off her gloves so strongly that the pony had stopped trying to turn his head toward her, which he only ever did when he wanted to sneeze at something. The lime avenue had been cut back severely since Easter. Someone had taken the shears to it who understood that an avenue is meant to frame a house, not swallow it. Charlotte had not seen the lime avenue cut back properly in 7 years. The sight of it made something small and unexpected happen low in her chest, which she chose to attribute to the pony's pace. A groom she did not know took the pony's head at the courtyard. A young footman she did not know showed her up the north steps. She was led through 2 corridors she had been in as a child and 1 she had not, and then into a small flagged room off the kitchen passage, where a kitchen maid of perhaps 16 sat on a stool with her arms wrapped around her ribs and coughed like a saw going through green wood. "Mary!" The voice came from behind Charlotte, low, measured, warm in a way that was not performed. "Miss Howland has ridden from the village. Answer her questions honestly, and do not be afraid if she wants to listen to your chest with that wooden tube." Charlotte turned. The new Duke of Ashmore was standing in the doorway with his coat over one arm, as though he had been engaged in something practical and had only just been told she was here. He was perhaps 30, tall, dark hair cropped close. a sun-weathered face that had been in climates harsher than Kent, a grave mouth and unexpectedly warm grey eyes, currently fixed on the maid, not on Charlotte. His shirt was clean, but not new. His hands, Charlotte noticed, were a labourer's hands that someone had cleaned up carefully. There was a callus on the side of his right thumb that no duke would have, and that no duke could have acquired in the 6 months he had been in England. "Your Grace," Charlotte said, and curtsied, as she had been taught at 9 and had almost no occasion to use. "Miss Howland?" She waited for him to leave her alone with the maid. Dukes, as a class, did not remain in small kitchen passage rooms while apothecaries examined kitchen maids. Her experience of dukes was admittedly small. It consisted chiefly of the portrait of the previous Duke of Ashmore, which had hung over the village almshouse doorway until 6 months ago, when it had been taken down on the new Duke's quiet instruction and returned to the park. He did not leave. He took one step back into the corridor, leaned his shoulder against the frame, and folded his arms without urgency. "I will stay within earshot," he said. "Mary is in my care. I want to hear her answers to your questions, because she will tell you things she will not tell me." Charlotte did not quite know what to do with this. She had expected formality. She had expected a brief, cool reception and a swift exit into corridors where servants bore her along to her patient. She had not expected a duke who understood that a 16-year-old kitchen maid with an inflamed chest was more likely to speak honestly to an unknown apothecary's niece if the duke was a voice beyond a doorway than if he were a face in the room. She knelt in front of the stool. "Mary, my name is Charlotte. Your master has sent for me because you are ill, and he does not like it. I'm going to ask you some questions, and I'm going to listen to your chest. And I'm going to give you some small blue jars and one rather disgusting syrup. Is that agreeable?" Mary nodded. Her eyes flickered once toward the doorway and came back. "How long," Charlotte said, "have you had this cough?" "Since Candlemas, miss." "Is it worse at night or on rising?" "On rising." "Does it take your breath away when you laugh?" "Miss, I haven't laughed since Candlemas." Charlotte heard a short, quiet exhalation from the corridor that might have been amusement. She did not turn. She proceeded, methodically, through the questions she had learned from her uncle's battered book of practice, through the listening tube, through the gentle prods at the ribs and the collarbone. A mild pleuritic complication, thank God, not the thing that had taken 3 labourers from the South Lodge the previous winter. A thing she did not name aloud because Mary would know the name and would panic. She stood. "Your Grace." He was still in the corridor. He straightened when she spoke. "She needs rest in a warm room with damp cloths over a bowl of hot water 3 times each day for a week. I will send up a camphor rub and a syrup. She's not to work the scullery until the cough is gone, and when she returns, she is to be kept off the cold stone. There is a draught under the main kitchen door." She paused. "Forgive me, I am instructing you about your own kitchen." "No," he said. "You are instructing my housekeeper, through me. Go on." So she went on. When she had finished, he walked her back to the courtyard himself, which was not what dukes did, and he carried her apothecary bag as far as the pony, which was also not what dukes did. He did not attempt to hand her up. He stood at the pony's head, one gloved hand on the bridle, and waited while she arranged herself in the side saddle. "Your fee, Miss Howland?" "The village apothecary is paid quarterly, in arrears, from whatever account the estate maintains with us. My uncle sends the reckoning at Michaelmas." "Send one at Easter instead. In future, this house will pay as the work is done." It was the first disconcerting thing he had said. Not the warmth of it, which she could account for. The matter-of-factness of it, as though 100 years of how Ashmore accounts were settled could be rearranged at 2 o'clock on a Thursday by a quiet man in worn riding boots. "Very well, Your Grace." "And, Miss Howland?" "Yes?" "Thank you." She looked down at him. His eyes were steady. There was a small white scar cutting across the line of his jaw that she had not noticed in the kitchen passage. "You're welcome," she said. The pony turned under her, and she rode back down the lime avenue, and all the way to the village she could not work out why the weight of the apothecary bag against her knee felt so strange, until she realized it was because his hand had been on the strap for exactly 12 seconds, and her hand now rested in the warmth where his had been. The rook in the rectory elm was asleep when she passed. He came into the apothecary at 11:15 on Tuesday, 7 days later, when Charlotte's uncle was upstairs having his gout foot bathed by their cook, Mrs. Dyer, a process which involved screaming at intervals and which Charlotte had long ago learned to simply narrate past. The brass bell over the door rang. Charlotte did not look up. She was measuring powdered licorice root into a narrow glass phial with a horn spoon, and the powder had a way of rising into the air if she breathed on it wrong. "Good morning. I shall be with you in a quarter of a minute." "Take the full minute. I have an opinion about the arrangement of your shelves." She almost dropped the horn spoon. When she looked up, the Duke of Ashmore was standing in the middle of the shop, hat in hand, surveying the wall behind her with the same serious attention he had given the kitchen maid Mary. His gloves were off. The scar on his jaw caught the morning light from the front window. "Your Grace." She set down the phial. "Forgive me. I was not expecting you." "I was in the village. I thought I might save the postboy a journey. Mary is much improved." He tapped the edge of the counter once. "The licorice root and the valerian ought to change places. You lose half an inch of reach every time you take licorice down, because the valerian tins knock against your elbow. You would not notice it. Your uncle would not notice it. Mrs. Dyer's niece who dusts here would not notice it. I noticed it because I spent 7 years in warehouses, where the arrangement of goods on a shelf determined how many men died in a winter." Charlotte opened her mouth and then closed it. "Forgive me," he said, not at all contrite. "I have been too long among tradesmen. I tell you things that are not my business." "Your Grace, you own the freehold of this building." "I own the freehold. I do not own the shelves. The shelves are your uncle's intelligence, expressed in wood." She stared at him. It was the most unlikely sentence anyone had ever spoken in her shop, and she thought, very privately, that her uncle would approve of it if he were awake enough to hear it. "Have you come for a tonic, Your Grace? Or for philosophy?" "Both, if they are not mutually exclusive." "They are frequently mutually reinforcing in this shop. I inherited a great deal of philosophy from my uncle, along with the ledger. What ails you?" "Nothing. My secretary has a neuralgia behind the left eye that has outlasted 2 physicians and my own patients. He believes it is a migraine. He is wrong. It is the gas lamp in the estate office. But he cannot be moved, and I cannot change the lamp because the lamp is expensive and new, and I was told I would ruin him by telling him so. Have you something that will, at least, reduce the impression of the thing?" "Chamomile and feverfew in hot water 3 times daily. I shall send up a tincture that will be of more use than anything Dr. Prendergast has attempted. Shall I send it with the next errand, or would you prefer to take it now?" "I shall take it now." She turned to the shelves, and as she measured, she was aware of him moving through the shop, not touching anything, hands behind his back, looking at jars and labels with the attention of a man reading a book. He stopped at a small green linen pouch on a shelf above the door, the last of our uncle's travel pouches, unsold since the war, and his hand lifted and hovered briefly toward it, and then returned to his back. "My uncle makes those," Charlotte said without turning. "Travel pouches. Dried herbs for the road, a twist of willow bark for pain, a flint." "Are they useful?" "Much more than they look. I stitched them when I was 16, and they sold very badly, because the sort of men who go to Spain with the army do not shop in a Kentish village. There is a basket of them in the back, unopened since 2009. "Have you sold any?" 3. 1 to a tinker, 1 to an elderly clergyman going to visit his sister in the north, and 1 to a vagrant man in a storm 3 years ago who could not pay me and tried to leave a half-sovereign on the counter, which I refused. She turned then, with the tincture bottle in her hand, and she thought she caught something in the Duke's face before he composed it. A stilling of the eyes, a very small reorganization of the mouth. It was the expression of a man listening carefully to something he had not expected to hear spoken.
3, he said, quietly. Is that all?
3, Your Grace. He took the bottle. He paid Oku in exact silver, laid on the counter in a small, neat column, Oku, and he went to the door. At the door he paused, with his hand on the latch. Miss Howland. Your Grace. Would you consider sitting on the village charity committee? The almshouse. I am told you draft the resolutions. My uncle drafts the resolutions. I write them down. That is what I said. He allowed himself, for the first time, the ghost of a smile. Good day, Miss Howland. The bell rang. The door closed. Charlotte stood alone in her shop with her hands flat on the counter and listened, for no reason she could explain, to the sound of his horse going up the village street and turning, by the pound, toward the Ashmore Road. There was something. There was something about him. She could not name it. She pushed it aside. The valerian tins, now that she considered them, did knock against her elbow every time she reached for licorice. The Tarnmoor Village Charity Committee met in the rectory parlour on the third Wednesday of each month, attended by the rector's wife, 3 spinsters of various militant tendencies, old Mr. Foxley, who had lost the use of one leg at the Battle of Copenhagen and had opinions on everything, and Charlotte, in her capacity as amanuensis. There was an agenda of 7 items. The Duke of Ashmore arrived on the 4th item. He did not interrupt. He took an empty chair near the door, nodded once at the rector, and folded his hands in his lap while Miss Edith Pargeter concluded her remarks on the insufficiency of the current coal allowance for the 3 almshouse residents. He did not introduce himself. He did not need to. The rector's wife had already dropped a cup of tea on a tile, which happened to her only when she was excited past capacity, and 3 successive spinsters had forgotten their threads of argument mid-sentence. Item 5, the rector said, with the air of a man who has given up being surprised by anything in his own parlour. The proposal by the Duke of Ashmore for an expanded almshouse, to accommodate not only the 3 present residents, but also the 12 estate servants who were turned out without pension upon the death of the late Duke and the ascension of the late administration. He meant Mrs. Farley, who had administered Ashmore for 7 years as regent for her son, who was the late Duke's nephew and, as of February, no longer the Duke's heir, because the actual heir had turned up alive. Mrs. Farley still lived in the dower house on the Ashmore Road. Mrs. Farley had been absent from the village for 6 weeks, which was the length of time she had so far required to decide whether to appear at the new Duke's door or to ignore his existence forever. The village assumed, correctly, that the decision would not be ignored. Miss Howland, the Duke said, you prepared the draft. Your uncle has dictated a list of names. You have structured it into a proposal. There is a difference. She flushed. She hated flushing. She had been trying to unlearn it since she was 14. Very well. The almshouse, as it stands, accommodates 3 elderly persons, Mrs. Clegg, Mr. Sprague, and old Jemima. The 12 persons turned out by the late administration include 2 head grooms, John Mercer and Daniel Oakshott, 4 stable hands, Peter Larkin, Samuel Ives, Amos Pullen, and Billy Hoskin, 2 gardeners, Ned Plumstead and old Mr. Wither, a laundress, Mrs. Verity Dowd, a housemaid, Anne Starling, a page, Jem Rowe, and the boot boy, Tommy Larkin, who is Peter Larkin's son. 4 of these have died since their removal. 8 remain. 6 of the 8 are resident with family in the village. 2 are known to be destitute. The Duke did not speak during this list. He did not seem to breathe during it either. Thank you, Miss Howland. His voice was even. Would you add to the list Mrs. Clemens, who was the under-housekeeper? She was turned out in January of the year in question, earlier than the others, on a pretext. She is resident with her sister in Rochester and can be reached through the curate at St. Jude's. Charlotte set down her pen. She was, she realized, being presented with a fact she had not known. The estate books from 7 years ago were not open to the village. Whatever knowledge the Duke had of the 13 turned-out servants of Ashmore had not come from any document the rectory had ever seen. She added the name. Her hand, she noted, was steady. "Your Grace," said old Mr. Foxley in his bugle of a voice. "How does a man only 6 months returned to England know the name of the under-housekeeper turned out of Ashmore 7 years ago?" The rector winced. The rector's wife poured a cup of tea that no one had asked for. 3 spinsters held their breath. The Duke did not flinch. "I've spent the last 6 months, Mr. Foxley, accumulating exactly that sort of knowledge. Every person turned out of Ashmore during the administration of my cousin's mother is on a list in my study, along with their address, their condition, and such redress as I've been able to offer them. The list is not, at present, public. It will be public by Michaelmas." The room stilled. "I am not making a speech," the Duke added evenly. "I am answering Mr. Foxley's question." "Quite right," said Mr. Foxley in the same bugle, but gentler. "Quite right." When the committee rose at 4:30, the Duke crossed the parlour and stopped in front of Charlotte. She had been assembling her papers. "Miss Howland." "Your Grace." "I would like to commission an additional piece of work, if you will consent. A physical survey of the present almshouse. The state of the roof, the coal store, the bedding, the drains, the chimneys. I require a woman's assessment as well as a builder's. If you can walk through the house with my steward on any morning next week, the honorarium will go to the apothecary account." "I will do it on Monday." "Thank you." He was already turning away when she spoke. "Your Grace." "Yes, Miss Howland." "How did you take the fact of them, the 4 who died?" He did not answer at once. He looked at the fire in the rectory grate. "I received the list in Lisbon last September by packet. I read it in the office of my agent. I then walked down to the quay and sat on a bollard for 2 hours. That is how I took it." He bowed to the rector, to the rector's wife, to the spinsters, to Mr. Foxley. He took his hat and left. The rectory parlour remained silent for perhaps a full minute. Miss Pargeter, who was the fiercest of the spinsters, spoke first. "Well, I suppose the interregnum is over." "It has been over for 6 months," Charlotte said quietly, and she did not know, as she said it, why her voice was not quite under her control. On Monday, she walked through the almshouse with his steward. On Wednesday, she delivered a written report to the estate office. On Friday, she was asked to return for a detailed conference on the roof. On Friday, the Duke of Ashmore was present. They sat across a table in his library, with the almshouse plans spread between them, and for an hour they went point by point. He was not condescending. He did not pretend to defer to her on matters where he knew more. He did not pretend to know more on matters where she knew more. It was the strangest working conversation of her life. And halfway through it, she realized that she had not noticed the half-hour passing, which had not happened to her in the professional practice of her life since she was 19. At 11:30, a maid brought tea. The Duke took the cup she poured for him and set it down without drinking, and said, without looking up from the drainage diagram, "No sugar, thank you, Miss Howland." She had already not put sugar in it. She had not asked him, and she had not put sugar in it, and she did not know until this moment that she had made the decision. Her hand, on the teapot, stilled for a half-second. She recovered before he noticed. The conference went on. When it ended, and she was shown down to the courtyard by a footman, she walked through the hall, and she was stopped short, for no reason she could name, by the realization that the smell of the west corridor, the one you passed to reach the library, was not the smell of beeswax and turpentine, as one would expect of a great house opened 6 months ago after 7 years of neglect. It was the smell of comfrey. It was, she thought, actually specifically the smell of her own apothecary bag. She rode home slowly. On the Sunday, she walked home from church with her uncle's walking stick. He had sent her with it like a messenger, and intended to hobble to the churchyard himself and back on the terrible cushion Mrs. Dyer had made, and would refuse to admit he had needed the stick at all. And she met the Duke of Ashmore on the road. He was walking. He was alone. This was, for a duke, unusual. He had no servant, no horse, no hat against the weak spring sun. He was walking up from the direction of the vicarage with his gloves off and his coat over his arm. "Miss Howland." "Your Grace." "I'm going up to the almshouse. I would like to see it today. Would you walk with me? I can send word to your uncle if he will be anxious." She thought of the walking stick. "My uncle sent me out with the stick because he cannot use it himself. He will not be anxious for another hour." Then they walked. The almshouse stood at the east end of the village green, under a pair of lime trees that had been pollarded that winter by somebody who did not know how. Mrs. Clegg, Mr. Sprague, and old Jemima saw them coming from a quarter of a mile off, and the three of them assembled in the porch with the dignity of a greeting party at the Palace of Westminster. "Your Grace, Mrs. Clegg, Mr. Sprague, Jemima." Jemima curtsied with difficulty. "Jemima," the Duke said, "do not curtsy. Not because I forbid it, but because you are 84, and your knees are not warranted past 90. Sit down." Jemima sat. They walked through the almshouse. Charlotte took notes. The Duke took no notes, because he did not need to. He remembered things. Mrs. Clegg told him the chimney smoked when the wind was westerly. Mr. Sprague told him the coal scuttle was too heavy for Mrs. Clegg to carry. Jemima, who had not spoken of it in 14 years, told him what had happened to a young girl in service at Ashmore in 1788, who had been blamed for a missing piece of silver. The Duke listened. He said, "Tell me the girl's name, Jemima, if you remember." Jemima remembered. The Duke wrote the name in a small notebook from his pocket. Outside, on the green, Charlotte walked beside him and was silent for a time. "Your Grace." "Yes." "You will hear those stories for the rest of your life. Every old servant from Ashmore will bring you one. Half of them will be apocryphal. They do not need to be true to be worth knowing. No. Miss Howland, why did you serve me that tea, unsweetened, on Friday?" Charlotte did not answer at once. She had been walking with her eyes on the road, and now she raised them slowly to the pollarded lime trees, as if she were estimating the injury done to them. It gave her 10 seconds. "I suppose because you strike me as a man who does not take sugar." "Is that the whole of your reason?" "Your Grace, I do not know what other reason I should give." He did not press it. He walked her back as far as the apothecary door. He did not go in. He touched his hand to where his hat would have been if he had been wearing one, a bare gesture for a bare head, and went on up the village street. She stood in the hall of the apothecary, with the walking stick leaning against the coat stand and the smell of comfrey still on her own sleeves. Her uncle called out from the parlour to know whether the rector had preached long enough to be useful, and she could not answer him for a full 2 minutes, because she was trying to remember when, in her life, she had last served tea to any man at all, without automatically adding sugar. And she could not. She had served it that way once. She had served it that way once, 3 years ago, on a wet March evening, to a stranger in a storm who had said nothing for 2 hours, and then, from the chair by her uncle's fire, had said only, "Without sugar, thank you." The next afternoon, a groom came down from Ashmore Park with a sealed note. The Duke's hand again. "Miss Howland, would you attend at the estate office at 3 o'clock tomorrow to advise on a specific matter? The matter concerns the still room, which has not been used in 7 years, and which I am minded to restore. Ashmore." She read it. She read it twice. She wrote back, "I shall attend." She sent the groom on his way. She then sat down in the kitchen at the long pine table and put her face in her hands for 12 full minutes. Not because she was weeping, but because she was thinking, and because she had to work her way back carefully, the way you walk back through a field in the dark after you have lost something, from the present moment to an earlier one, without flinching. The still room. The stranger in the storm had slept, 3 years ago, in the chamber behind the apothecary's still room. Nobody in the village knew it. Her uncle had been in Canterbury. Mrs. Dyer had been with her sister in Ramsgate. The shop had been empty for 6 days. A man had come to the door in the wet, with a cut over his eye and a fever that had coloured the whites of his eyes a sick yellow. And she had been 19 and alone, and she had let him in, and she had fed him, and she had nursed him, and she had never told anyone. He had stayed 3 nights. He had been gone on the morning of the 4th, before her uncle returned. A silver half-sovereign had been left on her pillow. She had never spent it. It was, at this moment, in a small tin box in the locked drawer of her writing desk upstairs, along with 3 of her mother's letters and a pressed sprig of myrtle from her own christening. The stranger's name had been Gabriel. She had never known his surname. He had refused, politely, to give it. Now the new Duke of Ashmore was named, if the black wax seal in the London Gazette were to be believed. Gabriel Elliot Ashmore. She went upstairs. She unlocked the writing desk. She opened the tin box. The half-sovereign was there. The year on the coin was 1807. That was the year it had been minted. It was the year her stranger had said he had been in Spain. On the Wednesday, at 3 o'clock, she walked into the estate office of Ashmore Park. The Duke was there. He was alone. He was standing at the window, looking out at the park. The estate office was not the library. It was a working room, a table of plans, a wall of keys, a shelf of ledgers. And on the lowest shelf, clearly visible from the door, placed at the Duke's right hand for no reason of use, was a small green linen travel pouch with 3 careful cross-stitches of her own initials in the corner. C.H. She closed the door behind her. "Your Grace?" He turned. He saw her face. He saw the colour of it. He saw what she had come to say, before she said it. "Miss Howland." "You are him." He did not, at first, answer. "You are the man who came to the apothecary in March of 2009, in a storm, with a cut above your eye and a fever, and no name but Gabriel." "Yes." "You are that man." "I am." She did not raise her voice. She had not, since the age of 7, raised her voice. She set her satchel down on the table very carefully. "How dare you?" He took a step toward her. Then he stopped. He understood that this was not a moment to approach. "Miss Howland." "Do not Miss Howland me. I was alone in the shop. I was 19. You were dangerous. You had a fever that I did not know how to read. You had a cut on your eye that wanted 7 stitches, and I had never sewn a man's face in my life. I boiled water at 2 o'clock in the morning because I was afraid I would fall asleep and you would die on my kitchen flagstones, and I would be the apothecary's niece who had let a vagrant die. And I fed you from my own plate. And I gave you a clean shirt of my uncle's. And I did not ask you a single question. And you left a silver half-sovereign on my pillow. Because you had refused the coin when I first offered it, and I did not wish to leave owing a debt I could not pay. You did not leave your name. I could not. There were men in this country with a very specific interest in whether I was alive. If I had left my name with you, I would have exposed you and myself and the work I was in the middle of. I left as soon as I could walk. I spent the next 3 years accumulating the proof I needed. I have presented it, with the Crown, since February. I returned to England 4 months before anyone else knew I was here. I came to Ashmore 6 months ago. I did not come to you. You did not come to me. I told myself I would not. I told myself you deserved a quiet life. I told myself the stable boy, Gabriel, was dead, and that the Duke of Ashmore would be a stranger to the apothecary's niece of Tarnmore, and that would be the kindest thing I had ever done for anyone. And then your uncle had the gout, and I wrote to the apothecary and received, by return, a note in a hand I had not seen in 3 years, and I could not pretend any longer that I would be content never to see you. So you wrote me letters. Dukes write letters to apothecaries. You brought me onto the charity committee. You asked me up to survey the almshouse. You served me tea in your library. You watched me serve it to you unsweetened. And you did not tell me, and you did not say, and you did not give me back the chance to know who you were. I was afraid. Of what? That you would look at me across the library table, and you would see a duke, and you would not see the stranger, and that the stranger, whom you had kept alive, would be gone, and that I would deserve it. She did not move. She did not speak. She stood in the estate office of Ashmore Park with her satchel on the table between them, and her breath coming short. Your Grace. Do not that now. Gabriel. He closed his eyes once, a single slow blink, and opened them.
Yes, Charlotte.
You should have told me the first day. I know. I do not forgive you today. I know. I do not know whether I will forgive you tomorrow. I understand. She picked up her satchel. She walked past him, and she stopped with her hand on the door. I am going home. I am going to walk down that lime avenue, and I am going to go home. And I am going to lock the door of my own still room behind me, and I am going to sit there for exactly 1 hour. And I am not going to cry. I am going to think. At the end of that hour, I will write you 1 letter. You will read it in this room, at that table, alone. I will not know what you write back to me until you send it. Is that understood? Yes. And Gabriel? Yes, Charlotte. Do not come to the apothecary. Not tomorrow, not the next day. Write. I will write. She left. She walked home. She did not cry. She locked the door of the still room behind her, and she sat at the small deal table where she had, 3 years earlier, boiled water for a stranger at 2 o'clock in the morning. She sat for 1 hour and 6 minutes. At the end of it, she took a clean sheet of paper and wrote 2 paragraphs in her own steady hand. She sealed the letter, and she gave it to the postboy at dusk. The letter, which the Duke of Ashmore received at 6:45 and read standing at the window of his estate office, contained 2 paragraphs. The first named the 3 conditions under which Charlotte Howland would consent to continue her professional relationship with Ashmore Park. The second named the 1 condition under which she would consent to continue any other kind of relationship with the man who had written to her from Lisbon once, without signature, at Michaelmas, 1810. A letter she had never expected to see acknowledged, and had never mentioned to anyone. He sat down in his chair. He read the letter again. He wrote his reply on a clean sheet in the same clear, square hand. He sent it down with the groom before dinner. Charlotte read it by the fire in her uncle's parlour, with her uncle asleep again over the Gazette, and Mrs. Dyer in the kitchen making leek broth, and the coals settling in the grate. The fire gave a small spit and a sigh. She folded the letter into quarters. She put it in the tin box with the half-sovereign. Very well. The almshouse work took 4 weeks. The spring advanced. Hedgerows came into leaf. The Duke and the apothecary's niece were seen often together, always in the company of the steward, the rector, a committee, a maid, a footman, a village elder, a sick child. Never alone. Charlotte had set the condition. The Duke had accepted it. Neither of them broke it. They worked. They disagreed amicably about whether the roof could be thatched again or must be slated. It must be slated. Slating won. The village, watching, noted that the new Duke could lose an argument in public to a 24-year-old apothecary's niece, and seemed neither diminished nor surprised by the experience. They argued at length about whether the stables should be rebuilt for the returning grooms. They should be. Stables won. They drew up a list, with the rector, of the 8 living displaced servants and sent out the invitation to return. Mrs. Clemens, the under-housekeeper, came back from Rochester on the second Friday. John Mercer, the head groom, came back on the Saturday. Tommy Larkin, the boot boy, arrived on Sunday morning and wept behind the stable block because his father, Peter Larkin, had been buried at Beaconsfield in November and had not lived to see the summons. Charlotte watched the Duke in these 4 weeks, as she had not watched him before. She watched him give instructions to a carpenter with the exact tone of a man who knew the difference between the cheaper joint and the cheaper excuse for a joint. She watched him dress down his own estate manager in front of her for having kept Mrs. Clegg in a chimney-smoking room for 3 weeks after the condition had first been reported. She watched him listen to Jemima, the 84-year-old almswoman, for 40 minutes about a soldier who had come through Tarnmoor in 1788 and never came back. And she watched him take down the soldier's name and promise, in the hearing of everyone in the almshouse parlour, that he would find the regimental record. She watched him, and she catalogued what she watched, and she did not speak to him alone. On the Thursday of the 4th week, when the slates had gone up, and the new door had been hung, and the stables were in frame, the Duke invited, through his secretary, the entire village and the entire resident household at Ashmore Park to a ball on the Saturday following. The invitation was not formal. It was practical. The new Duke was to be introduced, properly, to the county. The displaced servants were to be reinstated, publicly. Anyone who had a grievance with the administration of the estate during the interregnum was invited to state it, in a small room with the rector as witness, between the 3rd and 5th hours of the evening, before the dancing began. Mrs. Serena Farley arrived, uninvited, at 8 o'clock. She came in a carriage with her son Hugh. She was dressed in pale grey silk, which was what she wore when she meant to be unassailable. Her son was 26 and unpleasant. The two of them stepped down at the south door of Ashmore and presented themselves as having been, of course, invited, and the footman, who had had no instructions otherwise, admitted them. Charlotte saw her from across the ballroom. Charlotte had come in a simple cream silk her aunt had sent her from Bath. She had pearls from her mother. She was standing by the lime-green curtain with Miss Pargeter, the militant spinster, who had been, against her own principles, enjoying herself thoroughly. Miss Pargeter said, quietly, "She has come to burn the house down. She has come to try." Mrs. Farley moved through the ballroom with the air of a woman taking a census of a property she was about to repossess. She stopped, deliberately, in front of the Duke, who had been speaking with the rector and with Mr. Foxley. "Your Grace." "Mrs. Farley?" "I had not expected to be invited." "You were not." A small silence. Mr. Foxley, the one-legged veteran, shifted his weight onto his good leg and looked deeply interested. "I have come, nonetheless," said Mrs. Farley, "to make a short address to the assembled company. I think you will agree I have earned the hearing." "I will agree to nothing of the sort. But you may speak. I will not silence a woman at my own ball, whatever the provocation." "Thank you, Your Grace." She turned to the ballroom. "Friends, I am Serena Farley. For 7 years, with the Crown's consent, I administered the Ashmore estate as guardian to my son, who was, at that time, the lawful heir in the absence of the late Duke's nearer kin. 6 months ago, a man arrived in London claiming to be the nearer kin. He has produced, I will concede, a great deal of paper. Paper is the easiest thing in the world to produce. What has not yet been tested in any court, and what will be tested, is whether the man standing in this house tonight is indeed the son of Lord Eliot Ashmore, or whether he is an impostor who happens to resemble a small boy who went to Lisbon in 1798 and has not been seen since. I make no accusation. I ask only that the question be kept open." She paused. Nobody spoke. "And," she added, and her voice took on an edge, "I should like to ask one person in this room a question. Miss Howland." Charlotte did not move. "Miss Howland, I am told that 3 years ago this March, in an ill-reported episode in your uncle's shop, a vagrant man took shelter for 3 nights, was nursed by you, and left without giving his name. Is this true?" The ballroom breathed in. Charlotte felt the pearls at her throat. She felt Miss Pargeter, beside her, grip her elbow once, hard, and let go. "It is true," she said, and her voice was clear, and it carried. "And are you prepared to state, before this assembled company, that the man standing behind me in the coat of a duke is the same man?" "I am." The ballroom held its breath. "Then you will know," said Mrs. Farley, "that 3 years ago that man was a stranger in a storm, without name or letter or seal, and that the persons who prepared his claim to Ashmore have had 3 years of access to you and to your uncle in which to arrange the small, convenient details of his alleged prior presence in this country. I ask the room to consider what weight this recognition is entitled to." Charlotte stepped forward. "Mrs. Farley." "Miss Howland, I should like to ask you a question in return." "By all means." 3 years ago, in March, when the man who was then a stranger was in my uncle's house for 3 nights, you yourself were, by the records of the estate, in residence at Ashmore Park. You issued 3 warrants from this house, all dated, all signed, during the period of that man's stay. If you had known, or suspected, or feared that a claimant to Ashmore was moving through your district, what did you do to verify the report? My second question is this. Your son, Mr. Farley, on the 14th of that same March, sent 2 men south from London with an instruction to find a person at a specified description. Those 2 men arrived in Tarnmoor on the 17th, which was the morning the stranger left the apothecary. They questioned my uncle in his own shop in a tone he has described to me as threatening. They left on the evening of the 18th. Do you deny this? I have no knowledge. My third question is this. The 2 men who arrived in Tarnmoor on the 17th were in the pay of a London solicitor whose office has, since February, been seized by the Crown on charges of forged succession documents in no fewer than 4 estates. You sat on the board of that office, Mrs. Farley, for 6 years. Do you deny this? The ballroom did not breathe at all. Mrs. Farley opened her mouth. Do not answer, said her son Hugh in a strangled voice. Mother, do not. Mr. Farley, said the Duke of Ashmore, very softly, and not to Mrs. Farley, and not to the ballroom. Your mother is entitled to answer the question. She is entitled to my house until she does. She is entitled to her dignity. And she will tell the truth in this room, or her carriage will leave this courtyard empty. Mrs. Farley did not answer. The Duke spoke, finally, to the ballroom. Miss Howland's account of March 1809 was confirmed, in a sworn deposition 6 weeks ago, by the surviving clerk of the solicitor's office in question. He deposed that 2 men were dispatched to Tarnmoor on the 14th of March to find a claimant named Gabriel Elliot Ashmore, and to ensure that he did not reach London alive. They failed. He did. That is why I am standing in this room. Miss Howland was, on the night of the 16th of March, the only person in the county of Kent who knew that I was alive. And she did not know she knew. If Mrs. Farley wishes to test Miss Howland's knowledge of that period, she is free to do so, in any court in England, with my full cooperation. The room did not move. The music, the Duke said, may continue. It did. Mrs. Farley and her son left at 9:15. They did not return to the Dower House. They went to Rochester. 2 months later, Hugh Farley was indicted for conspiracy to forge a succession document. Mrs. Farley was not indicted because she had not, in the end, forged anything herself. She retired to Cheltenham, where she lived quietly for 11 years and never returned to Kent. An hour later, Charlotte stepped out onto the terrace. The night was cool. The gardens below the terrace were full of the smell of hawthorn in flower and of cut lawn, and of something hidden somewhere, but was a wisteria coming into its prime. The ballroom blazed yellow behind her. She stood with her hands on the stone balustrade and tried to slow her breathing, which had not slowed since she had walked forward in the crowded room. The terrace door opened and closed. He came and stood beside her. He did not touch her. He did not speak for a moment. He put his hands on the same balustrade, 2 feet from hers, and watched the garden.
Charlotte.
Gabriel. You named 3 things in that room tonight that I had not given you. Your Grace. She almost smiled. I am an apothecary's niece. I have kept a ledger since I was 17. I know how to read a warrant and a dispatch receipt as well as I know how to read a prescription. You forget that. I did not forget. I underestimated. You are forgiven for that specific mistake only. Only that one. Only that one. He was silent. The ballroom inside played, faintly, a quadrille. The musicians had been told, apparently, to proceed as though nothing had occurred.
Charlotte.
Yes. Tonight, in that room, when Mrs. Farley named your apothecary and your village and you, I would have raised my hand against her. I would have done it before you did. I stopped only because you were quicker. I know. And when you stopped her, I do not know how to explain to you what I felt. The only word for it that I have, after 6 months of trying, is the word you made me afraid to say. Say the word, Gabriel. No, not tonight. Not on the terrace of the house I have just asked you to walk into. I will say it when I have earned the right to say it. In a room that is not borrowed, at a table that is not theatre, in front of no one. I ask you only to wait. I will wait. And, Charlotte. Yes. I should like, with your consent, to touch your hand. She did not answer with words. She moved her hand, 2 inches, until the edge of her palm met the edge of his on the cold stone. They stood like that for a minute. Then another. The wisteria below breathed once, warmly, in the dark. Come inside, she said finally. You are the master of the house. Miss Pargeter will have the rector's wife insensible if you do not return within 10 minutes. I shall come in 3. 3. 3. He touched with his thumb the edge of her smallest finger. He left. She stood alone on the terrace, and for the first time in 3 years, she wept. Quietly, briefly, and without distress. For the stranger she had fed in a storm in 1809, and for the Duke who had returned. In the fortnight that followed, they were not alone. They worked. They were in parlours, in village committees, at the almshouse opening, at a christening Charlotte had agreed to stand godmother for, at a Sunday service where the Duke sat in the Ashmore pew for the first time in 23 years, and the rector was so overcome he misread the second lesson. On the Wednesday of the second week, a groom arrived at the apothecary at 2 o'clock in the afternoon with a folded note and a small, unornamented box. Miss Halmond, I require your presence at the still room of Ashmore Park at 4 o'clock this afternoon. The matter is not medical. Ashmore. Charlotte read it. She put the box, unopened, on the counter. She looked at it for a long time. At 4 o'clock she was shown, not to the estate office, not to the library, not to the ballroom, but along the west corridor of Ashmore Park, and through a plain oak door, and down 3 stone steps into a room she had never seen in her life. The still room of Ashmore Park had been, 7 years ago, a beautiful, small working room with copper alembics and drying racks and a slate slab table. It had not been touched in 7 years. The copper had been polished. The slate had been washed. The drying racks had been scrubbed and rehung. Fresh rushes lay on the stone floor. On the slate slab lay a single sprig of comfrey, cut that afternoon. The Duke was standing at the slab. He had brought only one man, his steward, who was waiting silently by the door. "Charlotte."
"Gabriel."
"I will not propose to you in a ballroom. I will not propose to you in a library. I will propose to you in a room that smells of your work, and that, until today, I have not set foot in for 3 years, for the reasons you already know. Will you hear me?"
"I will hear you."
He did not kneel. He stood with the slab between them, and he did not reach for her hands. "I do not come to you empty-handed. I come with a house, and a name, and an income, and 29 displaced servants restored, and a cousin in prison, and a mother-in-law who will not trouble us. I come with 3 years of a secret I have told no one. I come with a knowledge of the shelves of an apothecary shop in a Kentish village that I have carried with me through 2 continents. I come with every small thing I remember about you from 3 nights in March of 1809, which I have not shared with any man, because they were the property of a stranger, and I have only now come to believe I am entitled to offer them to you again, as myself. Name 1. You hum when you measure tinctures. You do not know you hum. It is a very small humming. It is in the key of E minor. Gabriel. You refused a silver half-sovereign on a counter in March 1809 because you would not accept payment for what you regarded as common decency. You kept the coin when I left it on your pillow because, I think, you already understood that I could not have left without leaving something, and that my dignity needed you to keep it. I was correct, I believe. I should like to know whether the coin is still in your possession. It is. Then I should like to ask you to marry me. I should like to name 3 conditions that I am prepared to accept in advance. Name them. 1. You will not leave the apothecary. You will continue to work with your uncle, and, when he can no longer, you will work alone, and I will not object, and I will not blush for it in any drawing room in London, because the woman I am marrying is an apothecary, and I will not pretend otherwise. 2. The still room at Ashmore will be yours. Nobody will use it but you and those you bring in. 3. The half-sovereign will remain yours. I will not ask for it back. It was, and remains, a small silver promise from a stranger who did not know, at the time, that he was promising anything. She did not answer for a moment. Your conditions are acceptable, Your Grace. Will you add any of your own? 2. 1. You will not write to me, on our wedding day, a letter in which you try to explain anything at all. You will come to me, and you will say the word you did not say on the terrace. I will. 2. You will not, in the whole of your life, tell any person in this county that the man who slept in my uncle's still room in March 1809 was you. That knowledge is mine. I earned it. I do not share it. It is yours. Then yes, Gabriel. Yes. Yes. He stepped around the slate slab. He did not kiss her. He took her hands in both of his, and he held them, and he bowed his head to them, and he stood that way for perhaps 30 seconds. When he lifted his head, he said, very quietly, "Thank you. You're welcome." The steward by the door, who had not moved and had not spoken, and was a man of great personal tact, coughed once into his glove. They married in the Tarnmoor Parish Church on a bright Thursday in early June, at 10:30 in the morning. Mr. Howland walked his niece up the aisle on the walking stick she had carried home for him, and he complained about it for 20 minutes afterwards, and he would have gone on complaining if his sister-in-law had not put a piece of wedding cake in his hand. The rector read the service at a decent pace. The entire village was present. Jemima, the almswoman, sat in the front pew on a cushion provided for the occasion, and wept steadily throughout. And when the Duke was asked whether he would take this woman to be his wedded wife, he said, "I will," in a voice everyone could hear, and several people had not heard him use before, and the church, for a single instant, was absolutely silent. Outside, under the lime trees by the lich gate, The new Duchess of Ashmore stood at her husband's side, with her uncle's walking stick leaning against the gate behind her. The half-sovereign, which had been in the tin box for 3 years and 4 months, was, that morning, in the small embroidered pocket of her wedding gown, because the bride had refused to be married without it, and the groom, when told, had not argued. 6 months later, on a cold, bright October morning, Charlotte rode the black pony up the Lime Avenue with her apothecary bag across her lap, because the almshouse had sent word that Jemima was in a bad way with her chest, and the Duchess of Ashmore would not have heard of anyone going in her place. Her husband was standing at the courtyard when she arrived. He had been supervising the final stones of the rebuilt stable, which had been completed, at last, that morning. He lifted her down himself. He did not speak. He took her bag in one hand and walked her into the house through the kitchen passage and along the west corridor to the still room, which she used now 3 mornings a week as her working space. On the slate slab was a small green linen pouch she had stitched at 16, still with her initials in the corner, which she had never sold. On top of the pouch was the silver half-sovereign, minted 1807. Beside the half-sovereign was a second coin, identical, which the Duke had, that summer, found in a London shop in Bishopsgate, where he had been looking specifically for one. The year on the second coin was 1812, the year they had married. "Your Grace," Charlotte said. "Your Grace," he returned gravely. She picked up both coins. She put the 1807 one in her pocket, where it had always been. She put the 1812 one in his. "Jemima first," she said. "Then tea." "No sugar. No sugar." She picked up her bag. He carried her shawl. They walked out into the October morning and down the Lime Avenue together, and the rook in the rectory elm, who was never asleep when he should be, scolded them all the way to the almshouse door. And that, a listener will agree, is about right for the beginning of a story. If you have ever kept a silver coin in a small tin box because you could not bring yourself to spend it, for reasons you did not quite understand at the time, tell me in the comments what the coin was and what you never said about it. I read every comment. If you have not yet subscribed to this channel, you will find the button below the video. I should be glad of your company. There is another story next week. I hope you will come back.